Daniel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Now for something completely different. I always like to start presentations with a joke, but I'm rubbish at telling jokes, so I've got a cartoon. I'm not sure you could see this at the back, so just let me read it out. So all this snooping is intrusive and scary, but you have nothing to hide. Are you kidding? They read emails, your texts, you check out your web history. The government? No, the girlfriend. The point is, not that it's a funny joke, because it's kind of lame. The point is that this appeared in the Evening Standard a couple of weeks ago. And my point is that actually cybersecurity is interesting. And I mean not interesting just to professionals like the people in this room, but to your mum, your sister, your family, your wider social group, the people who are not professionally in the business. And I suspect that cybersecurity and privacy and all that kind of debate will be discussed quite a lot over the forthcoming Christmas period. And what's more interesting is that this increasing awareness of cybersecurity and privacy is driving demand. So you get this kind of thing. So Microsoft is running a national press and television campaign based on their privacy and security attributes of Outlook 365 versus Gmail, and I know you definitely won't be able to read this. So it says right at the bottom, to learn how to stop Gmail from going through your emails to sell ads, contact this email address. So they're making a specific play to those people who are concerned about privacy and security. Stop using Gmail and start using this. I'm not advocating Microsoft. What I'm saying is it's interesting that people, big organizations now and small, are now picking up on this concern and this awareness of privacy and security and trying to make money out of it. And some of you will have detected the irony in the fact that it's Microsoft doing this, given some of their track record. But I think this is really interesting. Begs the question, what's driving this? And the answer quite often is this guy. So Edward Snowden, has he really created all this demand and awareness in cybersecurity? Well, it certainly increased what was already there. So the number of times that cybersecurity has appeared on the front page of the Financial Times has increased in the last 6 months of this year as opposed to the first 6 months. I think it was 2 times in the first 6 months, and it's like 4 or 5 times in the last 6 months. But it's not starting from scratch, not starting from zero. It might have amplified the message, but the message was still there. I actually think it's more to do with these organizations having their password files hacked and the information distributed on the internet. Is there anyone in this room that doesn't have a relationship with at least one of these organizations? Good, that's pretty much what I expected. So we're all in this together, and we're all potential victims of a password hack. So I think, and I think that is quite universal, not just in this professional group, but in community more broadly. So cybersecurity is in the consciousness of not just the IT industry or even a subset of it, the cybersecurity industry, but pretty much everybody these days. It's taught in schools, for example, and universities, and discussed certainly in wider business community. So there's a big opportunity for the supply side and for those people who support the supply side, so government agencies and trade associations and so on, to really capitalize on this industry. But it's not an easy industry to try and understand. And we were commissioned by the Department for Business Innovation and Skills earlier this year to try and map out what the cybersecurity industry looks like. And so a lot of this presentation is based on that report. And if you want to read the 100-page report, then go to the gov.uk website, and it's there for download. Or you can contact me afterwards, and I can send you a copy. So what I wanted you to understand is the nature of the cybersecurity industry and where it might be heading. The first thing is that it's a very fragmented industry. Most IT sub-markets are pretty well structured. You've got hardware, you've got software, you've got services. In cybersecurity, it's actually quite different. So, for example, you've got a whole bunch of defense contractors, so Raytheons and Kinetics and BAE Systems, which acquired Detica, of course, a cybersecurity specialist. You've then got a whole range of relatively small companies, SMEs, but in the supply side. So you've got the technology vendors, so Sophos and Interseed and those guys, and then a whole bunch of services players as well. So encryption and Regency and those guys, and there's literally hundreds of these organizations in the UK. You've then got the global technology vendors, so IBM, Symantec, McAfee, telecoms operators are in this market, so BT, Verizon, Orange, O2, Vodafone, they all play in this market as well as a service provider. You've got the major global consultancies, so the big four essentially, KPMG, PwC, very substantial cybersecurity advisory practices, and last but certainly not least, the global systems integrators, IBM, CAC, HP, CGI, Logica as they were, and so on. So it's a very fragmented landscape, and what's interesting is that it encompasses the entire range of IT companies, from IBM, which is still the largest IT organization in the world, down to one-man, two-man organizations. It's the whole spectrum. What's also interesting is if you look at the market from a revenue perspective, I'm going to show you a chart, and this is the number of companies that we identified, and we got to 600, and then we stopped counting because we thought that was enough, but there are probably more. This is a chart of the revenue of organizations from cybersecurity. So, for example, if you look at IBM, we just looked at the cybersecurity element. Symantec, we just looked at the cybersecurity element, and so on. And this is just for the UK. What's interesting is that the biggest company with, in terms of revenues of cybersecurity in the UK is only just under £150 million, which is a drop in the ocean compared with the overall size of the IT market. Okay? And what you'll see is that it very, very quickly tails off until you get a whole range of relatively tiny companies. And to give you an order of magnitude in terms of the difference between the cybersecurity industry and the IT industry in general, the IT industry is dominated by 10 players. 10 players have 43% of the market in the UK. In cybersecurity, the top 10 players only have 25% of the market, so almost half of that proportion. And the rest of it, 75%, is spread out over 600 or more companies. So again, very, very fragmented industry. The other thing is that the market isn't necessarily cohesive from a procurement, from a buyer's perspective. So I wanted to give you some. If you remember nothing else about this presentation, remember the next point that I'm going to make, which is that I've been talking about the cybersecurity market, and in fact there isn't a market. There are 4 different separate cybersecurity markets defined by how organizations organize themselves and procure cybersecurity. And the first one is the most obvious, the defense intelligence community. And they buy the most sophisticated, high-powered, high-end, most highly accredited technology and services. And it's the thing that, if I'm honest, the industry tends to gravitate towards. It's the sexy, interesting, highly technical stuff. And if you work in this industry, then you have the most kudos in your space. The second market is the other side of public sector, the education, health, local government, central government, a bit more admin kind of stuff, which has similar, not the same, similar procurement habits, but certainly in terms of the sophistication of cybersecurity, in terms of their needs and understanding, it's quite different. And so if you are procuring from these organizations, you'll know the differences, and if you're selling to those organizations, you need to understand the differences between the two. The third market is enterprises, and I don't want to get into too much taxonomy about what's an enterprise, what's a big company and what's a little company. We tend to follow the ONS cutoff of 250 employees. Personally, I've worked at an organization of 10,000 people. I've worked in an organization of 3 people. I'm currently at an organization which has 60 people. 60 people actually feels quite big compared with 3 people. But using the government taxonomy, that's still a small company. But certainly a big company, I think you know a big company when you see it, so banks, pharmaceutical companies, those kind of things. They buy technology on a mass scale, they buy a lot of it, they're very sophisticated, particularly banks and so on, in terms of the cybersecurity, and they buy it generally from well-established large players. And the fourth category, and this is where some people get upset, particularly from an SME community, this fourth category is everybody else. So from a self-identity point of view, I think there are big problems in lumping SMEs together and then lumping consumers with SMEs, and I understand that. But from a supply point of view, they're actually more similar than any of the other categories. So they will, for example, buy technology from a local SME supplier, where it's rare, not impossible, but rare, for any of these other organization types to buy from a local SME. A relatively small player, and that's just SMEs. I think tend to buy from other SMEs. So from a supply point of view, it's important that you understand this segmentation. In other words, the way in which they procure technology and the sophistication of their understanding of cybersecurity is quite different. There is another major difference between all of these companies, and here it is. That you would think that the defense intelligence, because it's the most sophisticated community, would be the biggest. And in fact, the reverse is true. I hope you liked that build. It took me ages to do, by the way. So what you'll find is the enterprise sector, so banks, pharmaceutical companies, automotive companies, are by far the largest segment of the market, roughly half of the overall market. We are going to make these slides available, aren't we, Daniel? So you don't have to scribble down the numbers if you can't see them or if you don't want to. We'll make this this available, and in fact, the numbers are all in the report which you can download. So enterprise is big. Other public sector is the second, and that's actually that's relatively in proportion with the overall IT industry. So public sector generally is roughly 30% of the overall market, and it's the same in cybersecurity, so no surprise there. Defense and intelligence, people usually gasp when they see how small it is, but when you think about it, it's a relatively well-defined but focused type of organization, and they buy proportionately more cybersecurity than anyone else, including enterprises. But because it's only like 1.5 departments, their spending on cyber is relatively limited. Now that is growing because the National Cybersecurity Strategy is pumping money into that, but not massively affecting the overall proportions. So the message here is that if you are a supplier and you want to supply to the defense intelligence market because it's sexy and interesting and you can tell people that you sell to Cheltenham and those kind of things, actually think very, very closely about whether you want to do that or not. If you're not in there, it can be very expensive to get into that market, and there are very, very big suppliers in that market already. And maybe the rewards in terms of the market size, the market attractiveness, might not be as big as you think. So just be aware of that. The other thing I wanted to talk about today, and actually Tony Diehouse mentioned this earlier, I'm going to quote Daniel, which is a bit embarrassing because he's sat here. So this is from the report that came out of last year's workshop. So let me read it out to the people at the back. A key barrier to the adoption of cybersecurity measures is a fundamental business risk trade-off between being agile in order to respond to the market and being secure enough to operate in that market. In other words, companies, and I think your context, Daniel, was SMEs, companies make a conscious trade-off between do I want to be secure or do I want to be agile and make money? And SMEs tend to favor making money and doing business, and security gets in the way, then they will not do it, and that's a conscious business risk decision that they take. And in fact, I think it applies not just to SMEs, but all businesses, because the Economist Intelligence Unit came up with this statistic that looked at general organizations and found that 43% of organizations believe that information risk is making our organization less agile. In other words, having to cope with information risk and security and privacy actually slows us down. And that's big companies as well as small companies. So the big message, back to what Tony was saying this morning, is whatever you do, if you're implementing cybersecurity for third parties, or if you're an end user organization implementing it yourself, you must make it simple. I've got a great example. You want to see my new toy? My new toy is an iPhone 5C, and it's got one very cool attribute. It's got a fingerprint reader in the button. And I'm a bit of a tech geek anyway, but that fingerprint sold it for me. Now, there'll be technical people in the audience saying, but yeah, we can crack fingerprints, and I think it was cracked in less than 24 hours after the launch. The people who think that's an inhibitor have missed the point. The point is that I no longer need to use a password to access my phone. It's much, much easier for me to access my phone, and my kids cannot access my phone because they will bribe the password out of me, but they can't bribe a fingerprint out of me. And it makes the experience much more usable. Now I have, from a personal point of view, I have 50 passwords that I have to maintain. Some I use every day, some I use maybe once a month, or maybe even once a quarter. And my brain isn't big enough to cope with 50 different passwords. So what do? I write them down. I will use the same password for multiple accounts or variations thereof, and I will not change my password on a regular basis. In other words, the password model these days, given all the numbers of accounts that we all have, the model is broken. And we need to shift the password model to something like biometrics. And that's just an example of security which gets in the way. So, and the whole load of others, antivirus slows down your PC to sometimes to an ordinary, where the PC is often unusable. So whatever you're doing in cybersecurity, you need to make whatever you're doing, make it easy to use. And if it's easy to use, and if it does not get in the way, then it will be adopted and used. Now, it's tough, but I think it's mandatory given the way that we're going. And to take things to extreme, if you find that you can't use your fridge because it's so secure that it's unusable, then people will just switch it off because a fridge has a basic functionality, and as soon as you reduce that functionality in order to wire it up to the internet, then people will not do it. So if we are going to go towards the Internet of Things, then we need to make cybersecurity implicit, which I think is, back to one of the earlier speakers, at a data level rather than the perimeter level. Anyway, moving on. One other thing about cybersecurity and is it too hard? Now, I've done a lot of, I had a lot of discussions with CISOs and pretty big companies. And they feel that collectively, the threat landscape these days has grown to a level where actually it's too hard. And you'll see this chart is showing the growth of software and product cybersecurity, which is growing at roughly 4.5% per annum to 2017. But the services industry is growing at twice that rate. So almost 9% per annum. And that's reflective of what's happening in the industry. If you want to secure your organization, you're more likely to buy in services to deliver that as a service. I mean, it was interesting to hear the NCA guy saying cybercrime as a service, but there's always cybersecurity as a service coming very, very quickly as well. And that is predominantly the main growth area. So again, if you are on the supply side, then do consider, if you're not already doing this, delivering your capability as a service, because I think that's going to be the natural way to consume cybersecurity in the future. And obviously, if you're on the end user side, then it's much easier to get a third party in to implement your cybersecurity for you. And obviously, you need to do your due diligence and what have you. But I do absolutely think that cybersecurity is so complex these days, and the threat landscape is changing so often that that will be the predominant model. So with 53 seconds to go, let me just summarize. On the supply side, you need to know what market you're in and stick to it. It's very expensive to switch, and it's very expensive to get in the wrong market and find that you need accreditation or certification or training or industry knowledge to operate in that model. So you need to understand which market you're in. Make cybersecurity, whatever you're doing, end user side or supply side, make it less obviously technical. not more so. We all know it's technically difficult to achieve, but you need to bury that, you need to hide that. And I think you need to take away the pain of your customers. You need to make cybersecurity something that they don't need to worry about. So you need to educate. I think the levels of education in terms of the solutions for cybersecurity is pretty low at the moment. Everyone is aware of the threat, but not so aware of the solutions. So you need to educate. You need to enable your technology capability and also be prepared to manage that for end users, because quite often they're not able to manage it for themselves. Thank you very much.